So the
So,
first thing we usually ask people is like, what was your entry into volleyball? What's your volleyball kind of journey? Because your
uh,
Rolodex
so
if
BJ,
anybody knows
I'm
what Rolodex
go- I'm
is.
I'm going to ask you a quick favor, BJ.
Yeah.
Do this again
Oh,
because it
oh,
wasn't live, and
oh, we weren't
we'll
live?
start. Yeah, so we're live now because I'm listening to myself twice in the background. That's why I monitored it, and somehow I
Oh,
hit the
okay.
wrong button. So let's start off. Pete's here. Let's go.
All right, good. So another second introduction of Pete. We'll see if I can do it similarly. Um, as I said the first time, this is the kind of guest that I love to have on. Pete's a volleyball coach and is an expert in something other than volleyball. Um, he holds a PhD in electrical engineering, did nearly a full career, or what I would say is a full career in the design field, and then um, transitioned into being a professor and is now a professor at both the University of Dayton and at Marquette University, um, teaching in his field. So we're mostly going to talk about volleyball. There'll probably be maybe there'll be a little bit of engineering that'll creep in, but Pete, tell us about your volleyball journey. How did you get into the sport, and how did you build the wide ranging network that you have?
thanks for having me. This is quite a treat. Um, I started, so typically I went to, a, as a junior in high school, I went to a National Science Foundation math camp. Didn't know that there was such a thing, but I went and we played a lot of volleyball outdoors, hackball, got me interested. I went back to Denver where my parents lived and went to a International Volleyball Association match with of the Denver Comets. And
Yes.
as it happened, I didn't know it at the time, but John Kessel was setting for the Denver Comets. So it was many, many years later when I got to know John that we kind of went, wait, were you on that team? Yeah, I was on that team. So that's how we got to know that. I always was interested. Went to University of Illinois. Really didn't do much with the volleyball there until my senior year. The Big Ten conference championship was at Illinois, and one of my classmates was playing on the team. They got knocked out first round, and that was John Blair's last season at Illinois. The following year, they hired Mike Hebert. So
Oh wow.
I completely missed the Hebert years because then went to Georgia Tech, and that then I got more involved with the volleyball. Became was on the uh, club men's club volleyball team. I wasn't sure if I was the second team, third setter, or the third setter on the or the second setter on the third team. Not really sure. But then it was the team was horrible. They were in the ACC by then, and then somewhere in my graduate school career, which spanned about 11 years, Shelton Collier came along and turned that program completely around. And he tells a great story about how Bobby Cremens, the basketball coach then, said, "You can't win with it like this." So he went to the AD and got him more money so that he could build his program. And then after I graduated, I went and was playing rec ball and got really into it. And somebody said, "Yeah, there's a coaching clinic that's going on." And that's where I got my Cap 1. It was at University of Texas. During the class, there was a juniors tournament going on, and then I was like, "Ooh, this looks like fun." Then I moved to St. Louis, was playing in the gym when a guy I played with said, "Hey, you want to get into coaching?" And it's like getting a crack habit after the first year. And So I've been coaching since then.
Wow. So if I'm right, I'm thinking about the Hebert years. That would have been mid to late '80s, as I recall, because I
83.
remember. Yeah, '83,
80,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I remember him. I was at Wisconsin until '92, and we had Steve Lowe until I
Yep.
believe it was 1990. And I mean, here's how bad things can go in your coaching career. I'd gotten to know Steve a little bit, and then he, of course, died
Hmm.
of lung cancer. And the very next match, I think, was against Illinois. The next fall, and we packed the field house. I think there were
Hmm.
11,000 people or something. That was a record for a long time until um, I'm pretty sure Nebraska maybe or Hawaii beat it, and then we've gone back and forth a little bit. But I mean the first big influence I had expired early, so
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that was really too bad. But so you started coaching in St. Louis, and your St. Louis coaching tree was pretty interesting too. You were involved a little bit at Wash U, correct? You got to know them a
Yeah.
little.
Yep. And St. Louis U. So at Wash U, it was Terry Clemens. That this was
Yeah.
the beginning. I had missed the first couple years of their great success, but then uh, got to know the coaching staff, got to know a lot of the players. In fact, Terry's very first recruit out of Kansas City was this little 5'3" setter, and she was her first recruit. And I think her second or third year at WashU, she led them to a national championship. Terry's first one. Uh, Lori um, Nishikawa. And she ended up marrying one of the guys, one of my friends, and we all started our club together, St. Louis Elite. So
Oh,
I
that's
got to
cool.
coach Lori as well. Lori was assistant coach at Florida State with Cecile, and she was assistant
Oh yeah.
coach at Southwest Missouri State as well. So yeah, it's volleyball's kind of ingrown, kind of you once you start knowing people, you start knowing other people. So, and then at St. Louis, I got to know Marilyn Nolan. If you know anything about um, volleyball, she was the one that started E Pluribus Unum in Texas with Mary Jo
Oh,
Pepler, and they were the ones that barnstormed around Texas, playing at the time USVBA tournaments against women, but also against men in preparation for the 1980 Olympic team. So got to know her and all of her history, and got to know a lot of her assistant coaches. She had a lot of assistant coaches that ended up coaching in the Division One level. And
yeah.
yeah, it was. This is St. Louis was. I guess I kind of lucked into it because St. Louis became kind of a focal point in the Midwest volleyball world.
Yeah, it sure was. We had some former players that were at University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh, and every year that they went to the Final Four, WashU was there, and they were just dominant at that time. It was just incredible to see them play and at such a high level in the Division III world.
Yeah, yeah. Terry. In fact, one of my favorite memories was we had a Cap 2 clinic in St. Louis that was sponsored by the Gateway region, and the two key cadres were John Kessel and Terry Clemens. And
Yeah.
I never laughed so hard in my life. I wasn't even taking the class. I was just there, to hand balls and do whatever. But they were hilarious. And at the time, Terry was still kind of suffering from had some health issues, but she's now completely recovered. She's nationally ranked in her age group in pickleball.
Of
I
course.
don't know, of course, but yeah. So between her and John, it was a great time. My other line is I got so into volleyball that I started taking classes. It wasn't gold medal squared. It's called gold medal volleyball clinics, and they have player clinics, and they have coaching clinics. So I went to the playing clinics, and it was pretty remarkable. The I went all over the country. I was able to travel. So um, I remember one time going to Dallas, and that was the time that John and I had our conversation about him playing in the IVA,
Hmm.
and it was in Dallas. So, and we were, if you know anything about John, you know that he's got a bottomless stomach. So we were out having Mexican food and drinking beers, and we were just talking, and he was like, "Well, I was here." And he went to Colorado College, so I grew up in Colorado. So we started talking, and all these things started to fit in together, and that's how I got in touch with John.
Yeah, his Rolodex may be the only one that's wider than yours.
Oh, he's so much
He knows
more.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so our main topic today, and I had been thinking about how do we get how do we get you onto this podcast, and how do we get something out of you. I guess uh, my thought was to talk about just the value in being somewhat well read, and having resources to draw, not just from volleyball or sport literature, but from everything, from a wide range of literature. And if anybody that knows Pete, I mean, Pete doesn't go to the library. The library goes to Pete when they're looking for books. it's he's a book collector and avid reader, and I don't just want to get. There are a couple of topics. I think the first thing is just that broader.
Oops.
Well, somehow we lost BJ, but I think I think I know the direction he was headed. So, it's funny. I come from a liberal arts background, which gets poo-pooed sometimes these days, but it rounds you out. And I'm not an avid reader. I'll readily admit that. And in fact, reading comes hard to me just physically. And so I think it would be great to get your take on how you draw from all the reading you do and bring it into the gym.
So to address the thing about libraries, I don't know if everybody knows Umberto Eco. He wrote The Name of the Rose, and he was a professor of symbiotics in Italy. And when he passed away, he had a library of 30,000 volumes. And one of the key things that somebody asked him, "Oh, Dr. Professor, you have such a great library. Have you read all of it?" Right? And his answer was, the idea is to have an anti-library. And the anti-library is not that you have read all the books on the shelf, it's that you have all the books available to you in all the areas that you're interested in so that you could have instant access to it. And I kind of use that as an excuse for buying more books, obviously. But that's the kind of thing that I subscribe to, is that there are many things that everything's related to everything else. One of the key things in my readings about how creativity and innovation happen is by drawing analogies between unlike areas. So it's part of the human nature to draw analogies, draw parallels, pull things that are out, seem to be out of the ordinary from some areas into the others. And I think that's the key thing that I find myself being very good at it for whatever reason. But I am also, part of the reason that I'm good at it is because I'm really interested in seeing how all the oddball fits, that could happen, how, and people will say, well, you're trying to force something. Well, yeah, you do try to force it, but you have to be intellectually honest with yourself that if they don't fit, then try something else. That's the whole idea of failing and trying things and then moving on, and sometimes you may find that it's a good fit, and then you move on from there, and that's how you get um, people to be innovative. A lot
Yeah.
of the books that talk about innovation. Well, the key example is David Epstein's book called Range, and David Epstein has a whole chapter about amateurs versus experts, and then specialists versus generalists. And his thing, and that's where the drawing the analogy is from, comes from that is sometimes you get fresh eyes, you get people who are amateurs who are looking at things and say, well, what have you tried this, right? And in industry, they started to do this. They had these open forums where people could throw in problems that they have, technical problems, what have you, and then do an open source. Like, what do you think? How do you resolve this? And many times it's the amateur, it's the people who are not experts who look at it from a different point of view that gives you the best results. Epstein had a whole chapter on instances like that.
Yeah, it's when engineers apply that to a great degree. That's when things like trees come to pass, which is not TREES, it's TRIZ, and
Uh-huh.
it's that. Hey, let's look at the patent literature and see what we can borrow or steal from one field and bring to the other, and it, in a
Yep.
systematic way. And then the true creativity buffs, of which I'm one, kind of go, yeah, but now you're making it, now you're bounding it. But then again, a lot of creativity comes from boundaries and trying to find
Right.
ways around those. So it's really an interesting. It's interesting to help people be deliberately creative, which sounds like a contradiction in terms, but it's not. And the innovation field is there's a group called the Association for Managers of Innovation that I belong to, and we did a study years ago, and the average innovation office in an industry lasts about 5 years, maybe a little
Yeah.
less. And
Yeah.
and then it's the thing of the day. Then they go, oh, we didn't get anything out of it, and it's like, well, what are you trying to
Exactly.
get? And it's
Exactly.
just, yeah. So innovation practitioners, find a job every 5 years somewhere else.
Well, there's so I think of things in terms of creativity and constraints, right? And most of the industrial type of brainstorming, you know, innovations is very constrained. How how soon can you start making money for us? How much of what you want to do fit into our design process? Do we need to spend money on creating new tools, stuff like that? And that's over constraining the process because you if you constrain it that much, you're going to end up with what you already have. And then they come back with, well, hell, we've got the greatest thing sliced bread here. Why even mess with it? And then the other end of it is under constraint, where you have all the different possibilities available to you, and you don't know where to go because there's too many open questions, right? So
Yeah.
then you become you're chasing your tail everywhere. So
Mhm.
some kind of middle ground is necessary, and that's where the management of innovation really needs the manager needs to understand which constraints to put on, which ones not to, and how hard to hold on to those constraints, and how often can you loosen up those constraints,
Yeah.
and so on. So there's a happy middle ground there.
Yeah, I was interested enough in the field to go back to school now 10 years ago. It seems like
Uh,
yesterday. So Buffalo State College is the birthplace of brainstorming. The guy
mhm,
who kind of came up with that concept in the 40s and 50s went there.
mhm,
So he was a commercial guy, and he went there and hooked up with a PhD, and they built a school, tiny school.
mhm.
But one of the things that brainstorming gets a bad name, and there's all kinds of interesting articles written about it over the years. But one of the challenges for me is like it's not the brainstorming that's the problem. So you don't have the other step. You generated all these ideas, but you have to have a
Yeah,
process to brutally choose.
right.
And then there was a time when there was a lot, and still is, this idea of, oh, well, but we got to save all the other ideas that came up because they might be good. Like, don't
Mhm.
bother, just generate and then converge and choose and go. And the next time you've got a problem to solve, do it again, because you'll come up with different ideas then. And maybe some of the ones you had here would be good, but if you want to warehouse a bunch of ideas, you're going to just waste your time warehousing them, because you're not going to act on them if you're doing it right. If you're doing it wrong, you'll try to do 20 of them, none of which will get done.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a discipline to learn, but everybody thinks they can brainstorm, and actually, no.
Well, we had technical managers. We had a problem at work, and it was pretty much a showstopper. And so the technical manager's solution was to say, okay, let's take all the smart guys in the world in the company, lock them up in a room for days until they come out with a solution. And that never works. Never ever works, because you have to take into account the personality of people. Introverts will absorb and integrate, and then go off and think, and then they do their thinking very methodically. And then the other factor is the group think factor. If you have a manager inside that room, that manager will say, "Well, I think this," and then everybody's just going to go, "Shh,"
Yeah.
and they go along with it. So it's really interesting. I read this book a few years ago. It's called The Idea Factory. It's about the Bell Labs,
Yeah.
and how Bell Labs came into being. And everything that Steve Jobs got credit for, Bell Labs did years ago. They made you go get your mail in the main in the main mail pickup area. They put different people of different talents into the same offices, forcing them to interact, forcing them to talk. And this is building for the long term. This is not a single sit down brainstorming session, right? So one of the great stories is the invention of the bipolar junction transistor. The three people got PhDs in it. John Bardeen, who was at University of Illinois, he was the theoretician, and then Bratton was the experimentalist, and they sat next to each other, tables next to each other in the same office, and that's how they were able to get it to work, right? So, and this was back in the old building, and then they built a brand new Bell Labs building, and it was all architecturally configured so that you could get people from different idea areas to start talking to each other,
Yeah.
right? And, and it makes real sense. That's why you know I look at the winter AVCA convention with the spring AVCA convention, And it's very rare that we get men's coaches to show up in the winter one. And it's too bad because they have a lot of great ideas. Now, a lot of what they have to work with is different because they're stronger and they're um, physically more aggressive, but there are a lot of things there. There are a lot of
Yeah.
things there that maybe we could develop and to look at the women's game now. Back in the day when we had, I don't know if I think you guys may remember Natalie Williams from UCLA, and
Yeah.
and Al Skate said no women's team should be running a back row attack unless they had Natalie Williams. She was that good because everybody else attacking the ball just weren't hitting as hard as she is. But now all of these women are hitting the crap out of the ball,
Sure.
right? So, and I can't help but think, well, maybe if we weren't so close-minded about it, that we would develop it. Oh, it would develop quicker over the history of women's volleyball.
Yeah, at the lower level of the game, and I tend to coach brand new players. I mean, 17-year-olds who've never played before. But there's this attitude that, when I was coaching with Mike Hewlett, he would take our 13-year-old girls, and it's like we're going to learn how to take the ball with our hands. And you have so
Mm,
many people believe that girls should not take the ball with their hands, that it's disappointing because they can. They just have to get. It takes a while, and it takes doing it and believing you can do it.
yeah, that's that. I agree with that. I think I have gotten more liberal with the hands, but I still think that it's a long process. It's like swing blocking.
Yeah,
You don't swing block the first day. You may not even swing block the first season that you teach swing block. It's the same thing with overhand pass. You just don't do it because I see people struggling. I see people misjudging the ball. It's more about misjudging the ball, and then they run up too far up, and then they're having to throw their hands at the ball. And it just doesn't click. It doesn't connect. So they end up putting their team under duress because now the setter is having to run all over the court to get at those balls, right? So what's so bad about pushing them back and then slowly growing them? I guess people are just not patient enough to let it develop. I'm not
yeah,
saying don't teach them that, but you got to pick the right time to use
sure.
the right tool.
Right, and I think you've got the situation where what happens to us at our level is the better teams are better servers, so they can go short long on you. So all they do is
Yep.
give you a couple long balls, you back up a little bit, and they drop the ball in, and you either get out of system or more than likely at our level you get an ace. So
Hmm.
it's just for giving them, to your point, giving them the tools over time that they can use, and watch them develop. On the boys' side, I've developed our boys program over the last few years, and COVID certainly set us back some. But we went from not a whole lot to now you watch the boys in there, and they're comfortable taking the ball with their hands, which they weren't when they started. And yet there's more and more to do. So, and on the creativity front, there is some science. There's a fair amount of science behind it. There also is you can do an individual measures that show your preference for the type of change you prefer. And some people definitely prefer incremental change, and and that's within the current framework and the rule sets and the people relationships. And there are people at the other end of that continuum who never saw a set of rules they didn't want to break or ignore or go do something else with. And so if you're in an organization or a team that's very incrementally oriented, and I don't mean incremental as a negative thing because it's a very positive thing. Ask Toyota about their production system, and little changes. They matter a lot, and they're often very likely to be successful. Whereas the breakthrough changes, the Fosbury flops of things, come from a different place, and people are like, we need more of that. Like, if you take a group of people who prefer incremental change and try to do breakthrough change with them, if you take a bunch of builders and you say we want them to be more like pioneers, it's not going to end well. And so it's helpful to know that about yourself and about some of the people you work with, so that you can come up with a good level of change, and one that works. I had a group of boys who we kind of cobbled together to go to the national, club division. So you just enter and go, right? And I'm like, oh, we're not going to be that high. It was 17s, and we weren't going to be, we weren't going to be in the top 10, or we weren't going to go to gold divisions. And I had up like 3 or 4 lefties. I said, hey, well,
Oh,
how about running the lefty offense? And they went, well, what's that? I said, well, you run the setter on the other side, and you set the ball the other way. And they were like, oh, well, I don't know. And they were a little reluctant. I said, well, we're going to do it. And I talked to another coach who had run it years ago. And he said, it takes a season. I said, well, we got 3 weeks. And we went and did it. And the cool thing for me was I learned more about it from the boys. They were like, hey,
mhm.
coach, in this rotation, can we run it front ways until we get in transition and then flip it? Because it seems like it'll work better that way. Like, okay, sure, why not? Go do it. And they would do it. And it was, I learned some things, some of my biases were wrong. Like,
Yeah,
you need to have lefties to run a lefty offense. It's like, no, actually, it works really well the other way. And my outside hitters loved it because they were getting one-on-one blocks.
yeah,
It's like, oh, wow, only one blocker? Cool.
yeah. I had the first time that people that I remember was the George Mason men's team that ran it with Uvaldo Acosta as the head coach, and the setter for that team is a guy named Jason Oliver, and Jason is now the head coach at Toledo. So he was an assistant here at Dayton years ago. So and we were at, I think we were at MEQ. He's supposed to be working. I'm supposed to be getting ready to coach, and we spent a bunch of time talking about that. And he said it was great, and he was slow of foot. He was a slower setter, but he could flip it around. He could do the mirror image. And so he got the starting nod, even though he wasn't as good of a setter, but he was able to run that
Mm-hmm.
offense. He said the thing that killed it wasn't the setters or the hitters, it was the passers. Passers couldn't get themselves to pass left. And that's what
Yeah.
killed them. So he's like, yeah, I'm the slow guy. I'm having to chase all these balls to the right.
Yeah.
And that they made too many mistakes. But who knows what would have happened if they would have done, given some more time. I once ran. I had a lefty right side. I ran a slide 31 in the front with her. It was freaking awesome. First
Yeah.
time she did it, she looked at me and was like, "Oh, that works." And the other team's going, "What just happened?"
Yeah. What was
Right?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing about the passing, and we've found this now through research, is that if you we used to ask passers to pass to this tiny little target and say this is the target, but we found now that if we give them multiple targets, if you're passing to the left side, the right side, off the net, on the net, that they become more accurate in the place you're asking them to change to. Because I mean, this, as you go from team to team, the passing target changes, and just widening that range seems to be very helpful to players, doesn't it?
Well, it goes to the cognitive sciences, right? So we talk about the system one and system two, procedural versus um, uh, slow thinking. And what happens is everything that we do in sports is system one. It's all procedural. Nothing goes through the brain. Everything is through nerves. And so one of my favorite books that I read in the last few years is book Physical Intelligence by Scott Grafton, and he starts talking about what happens is you develop new skills based upon the old basis sets that you have in your nerves. And the basis set is you use whatever experience that you have in your basis set, and that's what you're building upon. So the more opportunity that you have to have the basis set, widen that basis set so that you're learning these things, programming it into your working memory in your nerves, neurons, and then you get so much better at it. That's how human beings adapt to it, right? So that's just it. You give them more opportunities to do broader things, and then you give them more opportunities to retrieve those knowledge. Then yeah, they're going to develop the skill set to to operate like that. But that is very much based upon how much experience each player has had and how much skill each player has had. So yeah, to your point, BJ, yes, the if you broaden it, you know, people will adapt to it. But the question is, how much time do you have devoted to build up those basis sets, and how much how comfortable, not comfortable, but how patient are the players, because they see that as, oh, that's a failure because it's a pass to the left, right? And it takes a lot for a coach to kind of go, that's okay, I could live with that, even though in the middle of a match they start spraying it to the left and your setter's crying. What are you going to do?
That it feels to me, it's always felt to me that, and we talk about it, the setter being the quarterback, and I don't know if that's a great analogy, but I guess it's similar. In those early years of learning, or not just early years, but at the beginning of a player's experience, if you can develop a setter that can deal with some adversity, you really can have a pretty good team. The passing goes crazy, the hitters are a little wonky, but if the setter can if you can find an athlete, and I think that's maybe the biggest argument to have an athlete as a setter, especially early, is can you get somebody that can run all over the place with their hair on fire and make the setter makes it better, right? As we say in our gym all the time. Can you find that player that can just make it tolerable for everyone else? And then I think from there, it feels to me like we can start to slowly get better at passing and hitting, but we could at least play the game if we can set some. That's just a feeling I've always had. I don't know if you guys feel the same.
As you were saying that, I thought about my very first year of coaching. So I'm in the gym. I know I'm getting the threes team. And I'm watching the kids try out, and I'm watching people select, and the twos coach is looking at this. And I'm watching this one kid, and she's like got to be 70 pounds dripping wet, 5'2", 5'3". Doesn't look like much, but she is hustling her butt all over the place. And the twos coach picks her setters, and this kid's still there. And I'm like, great. And it was just intuition. It's like, I want this kid. I don't know what this kid's going to be like. So we go into the season and we're playing along. We go to MEQ, and the director calls me. We were on the cell phone during the drive, and he says, "Hey, listen, you're in Pool A," and I'm like, "Okay, does that mean I'm the bottom seed?" And he said, "Yes, you're seeded 106th out of 106 teams." Which means I play the 1 and the 53 and the 54 the first day, and we just get shelled. And this kid comes up. I have 3 setters, and she's the number 1. She comes up to me after the day and she says, "Coach, can I play libero?" And I'm like, "Well, why do you want to play libero?" She goes, "We're not getting the ball to the setters, and I think I can get the ball to the setters." And I'm like, "Okay." And she goes and she plays and she gets the ball to the setters pretty well for a 106 seed, and we finished like 87th or something. And she goes, I went to our club director. I said, she's going to be your number one setter next year. And he just laughed at me. He's like, no way. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
well, we'll see. And she played libero the rest of the year for me. So next year comes, she tries out. She's our number one setter. And he comes up to me after the Mayor Daily tournament. So that's Christmas time, right? And he
Mhm.
says, I got a Katharina story to tell you. I said, okay, tell me what happened. She says, so we shanked the first ball. It's like zone 5 off the court. And she's screaming help at the top of her lungs and sprinting as fast as she can sprint. And she puts up a bump pass perfect to our outside, and we kill it. I'm like, yeah, that's what you get. And
Mhm.
and you know, she went on to play Division III, and she was all, you know, in her conference back east. It was like in Massachusetts. She was great, and one of the things she was great at was she played defense as a setter, which is like, you know,
Yeah,
okay, you know, cool,
that doesn't happen. That never happens.
right? And I'm like, you know, and she said we would talk late years later. I only coached her that one year, and you know, we talked years later. She said that year when I played libero made me a better setter, and I'm glad I did it. And I said, well, you did it not for you didn't do it to become a better setter. You did it for your team. And I hold that standard to, you know, I tell my players, that's what you got to be about if you're going to be a team member in a team sport.
Yeah, on a Division I level, I was living in Ann Arbor at the time. I went to see Purdue take on Michigan, and Brittany Dildine, who's the associate head coach at Wisconsin now, she was the libero, and they were having a hard time generating offense from the outside hitter position. So Dave Shondell told them switch jerseys. Britt went to hit outside. I'm not sure if the kid who was playing outside got the libero jersey or somebody else did. Britt, you know, against these monster blocks, she was making shots, right? And she was just, and you could see the littlest bit of change in the attitude because the rest of the team was like, okay, we got a chance now, right? We got somebody that can make shots, and we got somebody that can think the game. That's tactical. That's like having a coach on the court, and we got a shot. They came back and won it, right? And afterwards, I went to Dave. I was like, "Do you do that very often?" He goes, "Well, I try not to, but I got it there when I can because I can, right?"
Yeah.
But I mean, that goes to it. I think about those. I mean, I've had number 2 and number 3 teams as well, and there are times when you just don't have the kid. You know, you don't have the physical ability, you don't have the skills, and on the surface, you don't see the fire. So what do you do then, right? And the other way of going around it is to say distribute the leadership. Okay, it doesn't reside only with the setter if you don't have the setter. I would much prefer having a great setter. But if I don't have, or even a potentially great setter, but if I don't, then I got to train up somebody else, right? And you know, on VCT, I was talking this morning with a fellow coach, and it was, how do you identify those kids? How do you identify the nail chewers? You know, how do you find those kids? And the more important thing is, how do you develop those kids? And I think too many coaches from at a club or high school level don't even bother because they depend on everybody else to train up their kids. So, you know, so I see discussions about, well, we're just not competitive. Well, that's your job, right? You're supposed to develop that competitiveness. You Too many people are looking at the coaches at 12s, 13s, 14s and say, here, you need to instill this kind of competitiveness in these kids so that by the time I get them at 15s and 16s, I could reap the rewards, right? And that's what happens all the time, and that's what I'm seeing now in looking at the kids and coming in through our program, and they just let them go. There's no development. This is why BJ, Steve, the work that Dan's doing with developing players, that's critical thing. That's a critical thing for us to do, and we ignore it because we only have so much time in a practice. We only have so much time, and he's doing a lot of things with his Division III program because he's got their full attention, as much as academics will allow. But he's developing full human beings as
Right.
players, and I think I see some of the other coaches. I'm not in their gym, but I know Kevin Hamley well enough to know that that's what he's doing. That's what he does with his Stanford kids because his Stanford kids are so intelligent that they'd eat them up alive.
Right.
So he's got to offer something more than X's and O's, and and Stanford's outstanding with developing the full person, right?
Right.
So I see that, and I see. And I'm thinking, why can't we do that on a club and high school level?
We got that same sort of lecture. We were out at the Olympic Training Center, and Matt McShane. I'm sure you've run across Matt. He was at Air Force, and then he was at Cal. Then did the head job at Air Force and went back to Cal and got the head job there. But he said the same thing about the Air Force kids. Those kids are so smart that you couldn't just play volleyball with them. You had to offer them something else. If you gave them a drill and said, okay, here's this contrived drill and here's how you score points in it, they would figure out ways to score that were almost not volleyball ways of scoring. And he said it was a real struggle for him to stay ahead of them in terms of volleyball, and he didn't fully understand it. This was such a great story he told. He didn't fully understand it until there's this motivational speaker coming into the Air Force and going around all the teams, and he just said, "No, we don't need them. My kids are fully motivated." And the AD finally says to him, "Now you got to have this guy come over to your practice." So the speaker comes over and starts talking to him and telling him all this stuff, and the girls are just staring at him and nobody's engaging with him, and he looks at Matt and he's like, what's up with these guys? Why aren't they talking at all? And Matt picks one of the kids out and says, hey, Megan, what do you want to do in your career? And she says, "Sir, I want to fly big planes and drop bombs and blow stuff up, sir." and he's like, "All right, what are you doing to do that kind of stuff?" Like, "Sir, I study every day. All the planes that are in the sky, I study at every class. I come here to volleyball and study here at volleyball. And everything that I'm doing is focused on going to do that." And this motivational speaker is like, if you can imagine, speechless. Doesn't I mean, because every single one of those kids is like that. They all had, they all had big dreams about what they want to do, but they understood that it was going to take a wide range of things to do.
Right. And go ahead.
Well, some of it's tapping into what you have. It's at IIT, my couple things. I was able to kind of finagle teaching the science of volleyball. So, and John Kessel came in and talked to us about volleyball, and the guys would get ideas and go and build stuff. So we expanded it to sports, and we had the basketball coach come in. And he said, I'm sitting here trying to develop the basketball program. We were like, they won like 3 games in the prior 3 years. He comes in. He says, I go into the weight room and I look at my guys, and they're spending more time analyzing how the machines work than they
Exactly.
are doing the work. And he said, so I was trying to think of how to tap into that. So I went and I talked to the graduate program in data science and said, is there anything you guys could do to help us? And they said, yeah, we got 2 guys who need to do a paper. We're going to send them out this summer. And they analyzed all their film. They came back to him with a model that said, not which player do you need to play, but which group of players in which situation are more capable for what that situation is. And they went 22-5 the next season. And now some of it's athletes, for sure. Better athletes, all that. I think he was probably a little better recruiter. But at the end of the day, he said, I got this tool. I got these brains. Why not use them? And it's different situations. I'm in a school where, it's been tough the last couple of years with COVID, and the kids are all having behavioral challenges and all of that stuff. And figuring out what you have, what you can work with, how you can make what you have better, even though, we do not have a lot of big or fast athletes playing volleyball right now. And yet we're going to get better every day. And we try, and the varsities be really challenged. My JV, they're coming along. And we're trying to get better every day by figuring out what can we do better. And you kind of, it's a challenge that all of us face, and it's figuring out how to get the most out of that. And I wish I was really good at it, but I'm getting better at it every day, and we'll figure it out.
So the going back to the Air Force and the Stanford kids, those are people that are over constraining themselves, right? Because this is the way that you do it. And so the challenge is to get them to be creative. The challenge is for them to break rules, even though they're taught not to break rules, right? And and then and then you have on the other side kids that are like, yeah, maybe I'll try this, and maybe it'll work, and they'll think, oh, this is going to work every time, and then they miss 9 out of 10. So what do you do, right? And yeah, and to your point with having really intelligent players is a different kind of challenge. The main problem that I have is having 2 or 3 really sharp kids with having a bunch of kids that are just athletes. How do you meld the two? How do you get the best out of both without shortchanging either one? Right. And I've had kids that are so naturally athletic that it's kind of like, yeah, just go do your thing. And I know I'm shortchanging them because I'm not really, they're making themselves better by playing, but I'm not really helping them but then I'm trying to break the over constrained kids of the habit of being over constrained. Right. And so that's always been a real challenge. The thing with doing the data science, that's pretty interesting that they're able to capture the causal relationship amongst each of the pieces. What we do a lot in sports science is we keep looking at the individual pieces, as you had said, Steve, about how does each player help us, but then we tend to uh, not make the connection between player to player because that connection, that correlation is pretty tenuous. And that I guess is the goal of data science because big data because the usually there's a threshold as to the kind of correlation that you get, and stuff that you usually would toss out in normal statistical analysis is become a big deal with data mining because you're finding some kind of correlation. The problem is how much of that correlation is noise and how much of that correlation is real. That's what you have to, yeah.
And that's where you get to, then that's when you get to training an AI, which is a different thing than doing statistics. And it gets
Yes.
really interesting to see what that can yield. And it's going to be, there'll probably be some good stuff it yields and some really bad stuff it yields, but it's going to be
Okay.
interesting.
So you just hit upon my latest soapbox topic is artificial general intelligence. So have you heard of a guy named Gary Marcus?
I have not.
He he's made he's a he had a startup in the Northeast on developing AI, developed an AI package. He also is he's a professor of psychology. He's made his millions, and his he's been challenging Google, Elon Musk. He's thrown stuff out there that says the way we are doing artificial intelligence will never get us to artificial general intelligence because all we're doing with AI is glorified curve fitting because we're taking the training data and we're trying to fit it. And you cannot teach something to think by just doing that. And the other guy who's kind of in line with him is a guy named Judea Pearl, and his thing is causal inference. So he builds a massive causal model that's not statistics based, but it works with the statistics so that it develops a framework with the causality. And that's kind of something that I'm playing with because I'm trying to do that with my engineering design stuff and then with volleyball stuff is using that causal inference engine to see what we get. He wrote his latest book is called The Book of Why, which is really fascinating because he kind of goes into his causal inference math and he also follows the history of it. But I think that's the route that's another route to get um, artificial intelligence, right? And the they've really convinced me because I've been reading a bit about this stuff, and they're like, yeah, it's just curve fitting. And right away, as soon as they said curve fitting, I was like, yep, that's exactly what they're doing. All the training sets, all the test sets, they're all just curve fitting. They're highly nonlinear curve fitting, but curve fitting all the same. So there's no insight, there's no causal relationship in it.
Yeah,
But
and I
that's my
think well, and I think that there's merit to that. It's a useful tool, but it's not a tool that you want to imply that it does more than it does.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You need to recognize the limits, and that's why Gary Marcus went after Elon Musk because Musk is pushing his Tesla self-driving vehicle, because of we got artificial intelligence, and it keeps getting into trouble,
Yeah.
r- r- causing accidents, for example.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to take this back to what we originally had sort
Oh,
of.
you're going to make us come back to Earth?
No. This is good stuff.
I know.
It's a great conversation, worth having. But having Pete here, I want to get back into for particularly for newer coaches, and we know coaches are busy. They have a ton of work to do. Most of the coaches that we are dealing with or mentoring have a full-time job and they're coaching, so they're busy people. And if you're a I wouldn't say a non-reader, but if you're a typical citizen and you walk into a Barnes and Noble or a place like Pete and I love, which is the used bookstore, there are millions of books. Where does somebody who's not an avid reader, that's a coach, where's a good place for them to start? What are a couple of things that they can start to look at?
Okay, so two guys that I'm fixated on right now is Daniel Abraham, which I post enough of his
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting, and he's really got a pretty good idea about the learning. I'm reading him because I'm reading him for part of my college teaching and part of it from the coaching stuff. And he's a soccer guy, but he cites the latest literature. So whenever he throws out a name, I just grad gravitate towards it. The other guy is Doug Lemoff, who
Yeah.
teach like a champion, and
Yeah.
and he's again a soccer guy, but a lot of what he does, if you went through, it's his book, Coach's Guide to Teaching. It's like a checklist of deeper thinking, surface stuff, trying to get kids to do things and so on and so forth. There's a lot of psychology involved. And the beauty part is that he does a lot of these things through video. So if you get the book, you have access to the videos on his website, and shows actual teachers teaching or actual coaches coaching that illustrate what he's talking about. And my main source of sports type writing is Vern Gambetta. I mean, Vern has more books than I do, reads prolifically. I mean, it's unbelievable. And on everything, history, just coaching stuff, all of that. So I kind of go by them and then I go off of it. One of the things I learned in grad school is to look up citations. Who refers to my base set of books, set of papers? Whoever references it, I'm interested in seeing what they have to say. And then from that, you go on. Twitter, believe it or not, is a really good source, because if you get yourself, find yourself some people, I follow Lemoff, I follow Marcus, I follow Dan Abrahams. And whenever they mention something, I look, and I don't have enough time to read everything, but I go get a little snippet of it, and if it kind of follows along, or if it challenges something really um, vociferously, then I give it a look. And you have to have your own personal point of view, and you filter what they have to say through your point of view, and then you decide if that's what you want, if that's good enough for you.
Yeah, I
I
think
think the
that's
Twitter thing is great. That's a great point because, and that's why I like Lemoff's work, because he puts it into short little bits. So if you're
Yeah,
somebody, you know, I mean, you might personally like reading, the whole book, but somebody else might have 15 minutes a day that they're willing to dedicate, and you can learn from Lemov by reading one or two of his, short little bursts, and you're not going to get the full background of why, but you're going to get some ideas, right, about
yeah.
how that's going to work, and maybe that can spark uh, a stressed coach into looking a little deeper.
Well, it's cumulative, right? So we all started out reading drill books because we were panicking because we're
Yeah.
going into our first practice and we didn't have enough drills, right? And then slowly but surely you start building up something, and then you start getting a point of view. You start going, well, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? And then that's where the little bits and pieces add up. And somewhere along the line, whether you wanted to or not, you read the entire book through the accumulation of the little lessons that he puts out there. Or you get to the point where you're going, I've got all these little pieces and none of it fits together. I need to see the big picture. And when you get to that point, that's when you get the patience to read the whole book.
I think the other thing with it is, for coaches, is coach how you coach. Be yourself when you coach. It's like, why do you just sit there? Why aren't you up on your feet like all the other coaches? Which is not all the other coaches, but the majority. Like
Hmm.
I've prepared them as well as I can prepare them. I can keep track of what's going on better, yelling at them, and my yelling right now is all generally speaking somebody not being in rotation because we're still
Hmm.
learning that, and it's like no, you need to get in between these two, and that kind of stuff. But other than that, it's not you made a bad pass or you need to do this or it's like no, they'll play. But that's me. I have other coaches who are fantastic at getting their team energy up by being active on their feet. Well, great, coach, how you coach. But my best advice would be just be. I hate to. I'll do a Ted Lasso here. Be curious, not judgmental, which is not a
Hmm.
Walt Whitman quote. And it's a Ted Lasso quote, and also just keep learning. Be curious enough to go. Okay, I don't. There's a lot I still don't know, and I haven't tried.
So I jokingly about 10, 15 years ago, I started calling myself a polymath in training. So I want to know something about everything, right? And now I've kind of changed it to curious polymath, right? So we have that curiosity, and I want to know about everything. And I think you need to do that. Getting back to the coaching part of it is the beginning of every season with a new team is hard because they don't trust you and you don't trust them, right? So you're going through all of this, and all of this time, you need to lay yourself out there and say, "This is me. You guys need to come halfway with me, and I'm willing to come halfway with you." And somewhere about the middle of the season, they're kind of like looking at me standing on the sidelines with my arms crossed like this, and they'll go, "Oh, he's happy," or "Oh, he's pissed," right? They know. And then I look at a kid and she's looking at me and she would go, nod her head, go, "Yeah, it's on me. I got it. Fine." Right? Whereas before I'd be like, "Are you okay? What are you doing?" There is that breaking point. There is that point where you both feel comfortable enough. And that's when you really get most of your work done. When you're
That is
not messing around with it.
that is so good. And it is really true. I've got a middle right now who's got like an interesting hitch in her approach, and she just did not want to give. And I'm like, okay, we're just gonna just keep playing. She's great. But I said, I just want you to play above the net. Just you're good at getting above the net. Get above the net and do what you can do. And then I whispered in her ear a couple weeks ago. I said, when and if you're ready, I can show you how to get to the next level with improving how you do this. You're doing this kind of swim thing to start your approach, which is taking time and making you late. And I think can help you with that. But you got to, you tell me when you're ready. And
Yeah.
and now that we're almost at the trust level now, where I think that's going to happen. It might take another week or two.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's you're exactly right. They don't know you, and some of these girls know me a little bit, but they know me from the boys program, and
Right.
it's a different kind of knowing. They don't know that I care about them yet, and
Yes.
now they're
Yes.
kind of getting to that point, and that's you're right. When that happens, good stuff happens.
Yep.
It's tricky to win the players over. I'm in that same boat right now, and just I mean, even the simplest things, I get to practice early and start setting up nets so they don't have to.
Yeah.
That little bit of building, I think of it almost as like a currency. You're building a little bit of trust or a little bit of I don't know, just putting chips in the bank if you're helping them
Well,
out, right?
yeah. That's John's thing. An emotional bank account. He
Yeah.
talks about that all the time. But it's one of my favorite things is I had a kid that was goofy footed middle, and you know all season long. And then season's done. She's playing in high school. I'm over there watching her. And she goes up, buries the ball, turns around, points me out in the crowd, and go, I did the right footwork. It's like, yes, you did. Right? And it's like, well, she knew. First of all, she knew, and second of all, she was like, yeah, now I know, and she had that trust in me, and that's a beautiful thing, right?
Those are the, yeah,
That's why we do this.
Yep.
yeah, for sure. What else can you tell us? What have we not asked that we should have asked? Like, what was the final question that Steve or I should have asked? Because we're over our time limit, but it's been such good conversation.
I think that we well one of my main things is the over reliance on statistics that we have, and most of the over reliance comes from people trying to infer conclusions that the data does not support. And the main thing with most coaches is I look at practice stats, I look at competition stats, and I treated the same. And no, different circumstances, different environment. The statistics are a great thing if you're dealing with descriptive statistics, okay, which is that day against that opponent. So the national team, they've got all kinds of statistics, and they tell the coaching staff, next game, next set, here are the stats, and you could use that. It's very immediate. But when you're coming around, I think I think heat maps are a great thing because it tells you where everybody's hitting. So that's something that you could use to infer, you know, something about the players. But when you start taking averages and saying, well, this is the way our trend is, yeah, I'm not so sure that's such a great thing. And I don't, Steve, I don't know if you've come up against statistical process control, and I'm really big about special cause and common cause. When it's a special cause, we need to identify it and take it out of the stats. And then there's common cause, which is, okay, here's our problem, we need to fix it. Or if the mean value is too low or too high, we got to do something to fix it. But that's about it. You can't say, well, this kid is just, our team is just better, is operating at this point. And then when we start operating above or below our average, we either celebrate too much or we get distraught too much. And that's not the case because you're not looking at the way it's a bare minimum indication of how your team is performing, but that's about it. Don't dive too much into it.
Yeah, I think there can be a lot of noise. I mean, it is helpful to try to know what the surface looks like so you know where the steep fall offs are
Right.
and where the shallow ones are. But at the end
Yeah.
of it, I look at stats. The way I use them, I did what a lot of coaches do. I got really into stats and I put them up after practice. Or we would have a match or a tournament. I'd put them up, and not realizing that they weren't helping the player. And one of the things that I beat on in my executive coaching is I tell people a story about Peter Drucker. And everybody,
Mhm.
business stuff is based on, hey, everybody quotes, what gets managed what gets measured gets managed, or what's measured
Yep.
gets done, and all that stuff. And it's real easy. And everybody goes, yeah, that's why we have all these key KPIs, these key indicators. And it's like, okay,
Yes.
great. And I said, so I chanced upon, I still can't find it again. He was being interviewed. And somebody said, well, you said this, and it has a big influence on industry. He goes, I never said that. And he said, so, and God loved the interviewer. He said, well, what would you say? And he said, what you should measure is what helps the person doing the job do the job better.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, think about that. Am I helping them by telling them they didn't pass well this weekend? Probably
Yeah.
not. The way I
Yeah.
use them is I often find that what I thought I saw is not what I saw. And that's what I go back and go, wait a minute. I thought I saw we served badly and we served 88% and we did this and we did that. And I would have come into practice going, we got to serve better. I'm like, we didn't serve that badly. So it helps me not, do the right thing with them.
So there's two things. One is the old Daniel Kahneman quote, which is, we instead of finding measures for what we want, instead of answering the question that we want to answer, we answer the question that we can find data for. And we make that shift so that we start keying on it. And that isn't the question. You're answering another question. The other thing is Edward Deming, the father of, not but total quality. He said there's the unmeasurable and there is the unknowable. So if you're constantly chasing after measures of the unknowable, you'll never get anywhere because you're just wasting your time, right? So know what your questions, knowing the questions that you want to have answered and figuring out whether you can measure it or not is alleviate the vast majority of the hard work that you would put into it, because it's not knowable, because that usually happens between touches. In volleyball terms, it happens between touches. You can't stat that kind of thing. So quit chasing after it and start thinking about how you can improve it, just by using causal relationships.
Yeah, that's a great conversation on statistics, and boy, that's we could do a whole seminar on a week-long seminar on statistics and their use and availability. We should probably wrap up, Steve, because we're an hour and 20 already.
Yeah, no, I was just laughing as you were talking about that, Pete. The drunk in the car keys old joke came to mind, and it's like, we're a bunch of drunks chasing car keys under the light. So we got to work on that. But Pete, it's been great. And Pete and I have met this morning, so it's a Sunday morning well spent on my end. But thanks for being with us. And
thank you for having me. Dan and Brian both told me that this was a good time, and they were right.
Well, we're glad it is. It's great for us, that's for sure.
We're working our way through the admin team. I think we've had 3 or 4 on now, because we had Heidi a couple weeks ago too, and she had a lot of good stuff to say. So if you're on our volleyball coaches and trainers admin team, look out, because we're probably coming after you.
Get Manzi.
We had Sean. Yeah, we had.
Oh, did
Sean.
you?
He was. Yeah. We had him. He was really good. He's such a storyteller that he was. And from the men's side. I mean, I love the stuff that comes from the men's side of volleyball, because it's so overlooked, but it's so good. So he was a blast. Yeah, he was good. Widman, we've been going after him, but he's been faking
COVID.
Yeah.
So
it
goes.
All right.
All right, guys.
Look, thanks. We'll see you next week, BJ. And Pete, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So we're back in the green room.